Hi all, thank you all for joining us. Today, our episode is featuring Emily Reid, and our guest, Emily, is a dynamic leader in AI education and responsible AI, dedicated to promoting diversity and responsible AI frameworks in the tech industry. As the CEO of AI for All, she is democratizing pathways to AI careers and creating opportunities for historically excluded AI changemakers. Emily is passionate about making AI work for humans and believes that AI should be created by an ethics-informed representative workforce. With a fresh perspective and a focus on impact and responsible AI, she is leading the charge to cultivate a new generation of AI changemakers who will steer AI in the right direction. Emily, thank you so much for joining us on the Debugged podcast. So excited to have you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Meta. Thank you so much for having me here. This is a pleasure.
Of course. So I'd love to first understand, how did you get into AI and why specifically responsible AI?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I, if it's okay, I'll go a little bit further back even.
Yeah.
So I first got into computer science more broadly when I was, not until I was in college. A lot of students that I work with nowadays, they've maybe been programming for a long time. I didn't start programming until I was a freshman in college. I was always interested in math and science growing up, but I had really broad interests. I loved theater, I loved literature, I loved all kinds of other things outside of the kind of traditional STEM fields, we'll call it. But when I got to college, I went to Tufts University for undergraduate. And I was really interested in majoring in math potentially. I really loved my math courses. And I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do yet, but I knew that math would potentially give me a lot of great opportunities. And then one of the requirements of a math major was to take one course in computer science. And I had actually gone to a high school where we offered computer science, which still, I think it's still around only 50% of high schools in the country offer computer science still today. It was unique at the time that my school offered computer science, but even though I was a AP math, physics student, I didn't even consider taking computer science. So this was something that for me, I was curious about, but I wasn't sure if it was going to be for me. And then I started in the introduction course, and I found it really interesting. But one of the first days, one of the first weeks of the course, we had a lab, and I got paired with a student. And I always tell this story to my students because a lot of them will have had some similar experiences. I got paired with another student, a guy named Gerald. He had been programming at home, clearly been programming at home for years. And it was very clear within the first couple minutes of the lab that he had a lot more experience than I did. For all the programmers in the audience, we were programming in C, but the computers we were working on were Linux machines, and I had never even worked with a Linux machine at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, it seemed to be assumed that we would know how to find files and open and close things in Linux, and I didn't know any of those commands. And so within the first few minutes of us working together, it was clear that he had a lot more experience than I did. And I was so nervous. And then he said to me, I thought they were going to pair us up with people of similar abilities. And I was like, oh my gosh. I think that I just am new to this, right? And so
yeah, that's tough.
So I tell folks that story because it gave me a feeling that I shouldn't be there. That maybe this was not clearly the place for me if I hadn't learned these things. But what I found was that when I started to learn and I got into the material, I found that it was so fascinating to me. And a lot of the things that in some ways I loved about math were even more powerful in computer science, because it was like this kind of creative, logic-oriented problem solving, right? Like you're kind of bringing both, okay, we have all these logical pieces we want to move around. And then but we also have this like, we need to think about it in a creative way. And I used to think to myself, like, it's like the computer is an alien that can do anything I want it to do. I just have to know how to speak to it. Right. And that's really what programming is. And so I started to really fall in love with it. But sometimes when I was in my class, I would hear folks say, ask questions that I didn't even, understand some of the terminology that they were using. And so I was really glad that I eventually stuck it out. I always share with folks that I actually found out I did like better in that course than Gerald did. So just saying. But I think it's important for folks to know that just because someone may have had more experience than you, it doesn't mean they have more ability than you. So going through that experience was important because I think that I could have kind of dropped out of computer science pretty early otherwise. I ended up majoring in computer science, majoring in mathematics and minoring in computer science in college. And then I graduated college and went into a cybersecurity engineering role. And that was a really, really fascinating space for me. Worked on some really interesting projects, but one of the things that I ended up finding that I wanted more of was I kind of wanted to get closer to the human impact that technology could have. And cybersecurity is a really fascinating field, but you're generally the kind of things that we were working on were a couple layers removed of like the ultimate human impact. And I had gotten more interested in like the brain and how is the brain different from computers and cognitive science. And so that led me to a cybersecurity project that included some machine learning. So it was looking at like how do we use machine learning to look for whether there's been an intrusion. So kind of intrusion detection, has a hacker come in using all these different markers and using machine learning to kind of better predict that. So that was when I decided that I wanted to go switch into AI. So I left my cybersecurity role and I went back to graduate school for machine learning and computational linguistics, or NLP. And that's what I ended up with my master's in. I did research in that space for a while. And that was really where I kind of fell in love with artificial intelligence because, the thing that really motivated me was how can we use AI to help people, to kind of make the world better. And I also think there was a really kind of compelling philosophical question for me of what is the difference between humans and computers, and as AI advances, how is that different or similar to our brains and our own intelligence? So that was also just really kind of motivating philosophical question for me, in addition to like really being able to see how clearly impactful AI could be.
That is such an incredible journey. And let me just say, I majored in computer science in college, and I was
Yes.
lucky enough to take computer science classes at my high school. And even so, like even having a background in computer science, I would go to those college classes and feel so intimidated by the questions people would ask because
Yeah.
they would ask a question about something and I'm like, did we even go over that? Like
Yeah. Yeah,
like I
truly.
read the textbook before this class and I do not remember that in the syllabus at all.
Right. It's like I missed a
Um,
memo somewhere.
yeah, like did everyone get an email that I was just left off of? And it was so
Yes.
intimidating, especially being one of the
Yeah,
few
I
women in the
know.
classroom. It was so intimidating, but it's so incredible to hear that, you were able to persevere through that and end up pursuing a minor. And then I know that you also got a master's in
Mhm.
computer science, so that's absolutely incredible that you were able to do that. And I'm curious to understand with your current work,
Mhm.
what have you observed when it comes to changes in AI development and AI education as
Yeah.
ethics and responsibility has come to the forefront of AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. So that was always one of the things that really interested me. I had, as I mentioned, I had some of these kind of philosophical interests, and that
Mm-hmm.
was a little, I took a bunch of philosophy courses, didn't end up with a degree in it or anything, but was always very interested in like in ethics and also like philosophy of computer science and math and things like that. And so as I learned more about AI, I got more and more interested in ethics and kind of ethical frameworks and the different like philosophical work around that. Because So there was certainly an academic interest there, but I also would just kind of see in places that I was working and in school and researching that there really wasn't much of a framework here. And when you compare computer science and AI to other fields, like if you look at medicine or law, they may not be perfect, but there are very robust systems and processes around ethics, right? There are certain ethical codes. There are certain things where you can like lose a license, right? If you're not
Yeah, like
maintaining ethical
HIPAA or
concepts.
MLR in healthcare.
Exactly, exactly. And so that was a really interesting comparison to me because I think there's one reason why that's the case is because those are fields that have been around a very long time, and computer science is comparatively a very young discipline. But at the same time, I think they also exist in those disciplines because we recognize that those are fields that have a significant impact on human life and on our society. And I would argue that computer science and AI in particular now have a similar level of impact on our daily lives. And I think it's a tricky thing because you want to be able to maintain innovation, and I think there's a lot of opportunity and creativity in AI. But at the same time, there are really serious effects. And I used to get actually very, very frustrated with the conversations that people would have, like, even pre-generative AI blowing up a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Before then, the conversation was still often, well, what happens when the robots take over? And and there are two things that frustrated me about that question. One is that it kind of gives up some amount of agency because it's like the robots aren't coming out of nowhere. We're making them, right? So how do we make them in a way that's going to be kind of aligned with our values as creators, our values as a society? But then also it kind of ignored the fact that there were at the time already present active problems with the existing AI technologies, right? So we know, for example, I always, for example, love to cite Dr. Joy Buolamwini's work on facial recognition, right? So she and Timnit Gebru looked at facial recognition software and saw that it worked much better on lighter skin faces than on darker skin faces, right? And then we also, with AI in particular, we have to be concerned about whether there are technologies where the data set is being used that can certainly be biased, right, in the case of that facial recognition example. But it can also accurately reflect society's bias, right? So if we, for example, if we're building software that is based on the, a biased institutional penal system, right? That is going to create software that's going to continue to perpetuate those biases, those institutionalized biases. And so that is a really, really important thing for us to be having some form of process around, right? It's impossible to completely remove bias, but there are ways that we can be looking at how we, technically manage that, and then also how we manage it from a more like policy and societal level. Like where are we using these technologies? How much kind of control or authority do they have? What is the regulation, if any, around them? And so we've already seen examples of in the last few years of folks being who were arrested incorrectly because of bad facial recognition software. So these are really important questions for us to grapple with. Again, my approach is that I think that a lot of the conversation around AI ends up being very dystopian or utopian, right? It's either, oh, this is amazing and AI is going to solve all these problems and it's going to kind of create this whole new world we're going to live in. And then on the other end, it can be, this is all terrible. We need to shut it down. Look at all the damage it's causing. And I think there are arguments to both sides of that. And what I would say is that there is a lot of opportunity and innovation and potential creativity for really amazing ways that we can be using artificial intelligence. But at the same time, we really need to bring in a strong code of ethics. And we also need to make sure that it's being developed by a diverse group, right? And it's not because the responsibility for having ethical AI should land on that group. That should be everyone's responsibility. But we also know that, first of all, these are great careers, right? There's a lot of opportunity. And we know that folks, when we're looking broadly, when we have a more diverse group of voices, we're going to be solving problems in a better way. We're going to be solving new problems. We're going to maybe be using an AI in ways that a more homogeneous group is not going to be thinking about. So that's where I'm incredibly passionate about building a new workforce that's going to be thinking about these issues from the beginning of their AI education, ideally, and are able to bring their own experiences and agency and problems that they want to solve using AI.
Yeah, I completely agree with your perspective. And it's so funny that you mentioned Dr. Joy. I met her in March
Oh,
at South
wonderful.
by Southwest, and
Awesome.
she is incredible, so smart. And I totally agree with you that, like, it's not necessarily the algorithm that's biased, it's the data and the
Right,
regulation of that data, right?
right,
And I totally agree with you that, like, the American people specifically have a more interesting challenge when it comes to artificial intelligence
right.
than a country that, as you said, is more homogenous. And I think that's really interesting. And I think it's really exciting. But as you said, it's also just a little bit challenging when you think about the future of AI, especially in an American landscape. And so I'd love to understand a little bit more about some of your work at AI for All, and how you're building towards a more responsible and ethical artificial intelligence education, as you mentioned. And speaking of education, if you could take us through a little bit of your journey through transitioning from MITRE to Girls Who Code and then AI for All,
Sure.
that would be great as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I'll start there and then lead into the program. So yes, MITRE was where I did my work in cybersecurity, did some really interesting research and development work there. As I mentioned, then I went to graduate school for machine
Mm-hmm.
learning. That was at Columbia University, and I left there with my master's degree. At the time, I was, excuse me, I was really interested in education, and I was thinking about doing a PhD because I thought maybe I want to be a college professor and teach computer science and do research, and I was very, very interested in that as a potential next step. But the other thing I got really interested in at the time was also computer science education. I'm the daughter of
Mm-hmm.
two educators. My father's they're both retired now, but my father's a sociology professor. My mom was an elementary public school teacher for many years. And so I've always looked at education as the way to solve problems. And so I was getting increasingly concerned about both the homogeneity I saw and this like lack of ethical frameworks I saw.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like education's a solution to that. So I was interested in computer science education. I did a little bit of work with the Teachers College at Columbia in addition to my degree in the computer science department. And during that time, I got involved with what was then a relatively small startup nonprofit organization called Girls Who Code. I ended up joining Girls Who Code in 2014, and we grew extremely rapidly during the time that I was there. So I got to see us go from, a small team of like 10-ish people to dozens and dozens of people. We had hundreds of teachers all over the country. And my team, I was the director of education. So my team developed all of the curriculum and teacher training for our programs. So that was where I really learned, about how to scale programs like this and how we needed to kind of form the educational experience to support the students who had been more marginalized in tech, and make sure that they were included and their perspectives were prioritized. And so it was that work that eventually led me to AI for All. I got connected to AI for All through a friend that I had done machine learning work with. She knew one of the founders, Dr. Olga Rusakovsky, and Olga and Dr. Rick Summer and Olga's mentor and advisor at the time, Dr. Fei Li, they founded AI for All with the goal of increasing diversity and inclusion in AI. And so I joined the organization in 2018. I became CEO about 2 years ago. And it's been a really incredible journey because everything that I shared with you about my concerns about computer science, they were all more true for AI, right? It's the fastest moving technology we know, right? It's incredibly impactful. Everyone's like either interested or scared or has some opinion about it, right? And so I was really, really fascinated with how we do this work specifically in AI, also having this AI background myself. And I've just been floored by my experience with our students in AI for All. So, our focus is to create this next generation of AI changemakers, this next generation of the AI workforce that we believe the world needs. So that is a workforce that is diverse, is empowered, and is responsible. And the empowered part I say because I really believe that in the agency of all of our students. I don't want to just train them up for the AI jobs that exist today. I know that there are going to be new AI jobs. We don't even know what that will look like in 5 years. Folks who've been in the industry for a long time don't know what it will look like in 5 years. And so we want to be able to give them the skills that we know they'll need now and the skills that will help them to go forward as the industry changes, those foundational computational thinking skills, and build up those ethical frameworks. So that's the kind of content part of what we do is students learn really the highly technical, responsible AI skills that they need. Hold on one second, I'm just gonna get some water. All right, I'll go back
All
to
good.
muting now.
All good.
um, I thought it would go away, so. um, So we focus on giving students the highly technical AI skills that they will need that also include responsible AI. So looking at security and privacy, looking at how do you debias a data set, looking at transparency and explainability. Another thing that we focus on in our program is human-centered design. So your model and anything that you're going to create, who is it going to impact? How are they included in the design process? Are they meaningfully included? That inclusion part is a really important part of what we do. And I've been in my role now, I've been in a lot of conversations with folks around the country who are working on STEM, computer science, AI, education, workforce development. And in some of these conversations, we'll be talking about this next generation, we'll be talking about Gen Z, and I'll look around the table and say, is there anyone from Gen Z here? What do they have to say? Right? So it's really, really important to me that we're always including the students' voices in our work. And that really actively informs how we build the programs and build programs that are working best for them. So that's an important part of what we do at AI for All. Our flagship program is called AI for All Ignite. It's a semester-long accelerator for college students. And the students learn all of these AI skills I described over the course of the semester. They end with a portfolio project, we call it. And this is something that, I now see folks who are trying to get jobs in AI. They said the most critical thing in the interview process, in the internship kind of recruitment process, or if you're interviewing for your kind of first job in AI, is being able to have projects that you can point to. Because there aren't a lot of AI majors per se. There might be computer science majors with an AI emphasis. There's going to be more, but being able to look at a project that you've created, right? You've got it on your GitHub page. You can talk about what problem you wanted to solve, what algorithms you were using, what data sets you were using, why, what was difficult about the process. All of that is a really, really critical part of landing an internship or a role in AI. So that's why that's a core part of the program. All students will be able to walk away with that. And then the other part of what we do in addition to the skills development is what I call social capital, or really building up your network and your connections for internships. So your peer support is certainly a huge part of what we do, but we do a lot of work to connect students with industry mentors, to introduce them to our corporate partners who have internships, who have roles that they may want to be hired into. And so our kind of core mission is to be able to launch those students, help them get a job in AI. And that's exactly what the program is designed to do. So for any of the college students out there, please feel free to look out for recruitment for our next cycle for AI for All Ignite. For the high school students, please, keep that in mind as you head towards college. And there's a lot of other wonderful programs out there for high school students. I do highly recommend Girls Who Code. All Star Code is an excellent organization. And code.org has a lot of great materials if you're interested in learning more online or working to bring that into your school. So there's a ton of great resources out there, and I just really encourage folks, whatever age or level you're at, to just try and dive into it, because the truth is we need more folks broadly working in AI. We need more representation, and we need the voices of this next generation, because frankly, my generation and the ones up above me, we haven't figured it out. So we need you as part of it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for talking us through all of these initiatives. So incredible. And those are such great resources for the high school and college students listening. I know that we're at time, so I do really appreciate you taking the time to answer all of our questions and speak to the debugged audience. Anything else you would like to add really quickly?
No, I would just say again, if any of this sounds interesting to you, please go for it. And for any of you who have just maybe you haven't been maybe you haven't been programming much, but you've used some generative AI tools. The one thing that I will say is that using generative AI tools now is basically like programming. You're just using English or your natural language of choice. That's really what generative AI has done. So if that's of interest to you and you want to kind of get behind the curtain and see that, it's not too far from what you've already been working on. So I just really encourage folks to play with that and go find some more information about learning AI, learning computer science, if that's of interest to you.
Totally. That's such great advice. Well, thank you so much, Emily, and to our listeners, thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. All right. Bye, all.
Bye.